He's been riding high in Lamborghinis. Now eyed by investigators for asset seizure. Hangwani Morgan Maumela, the supreme tender don at the center of the Tembisa Hospital tender scam, has since been pushing to get his foot in the door in the Northwest province as well. But as investigative journalist Jeff Wicks reports, Maumela's company couldn't even bother to obtain the proper legal papers to win this lucrative hospital catering deal.
We've got our hands on some treasury investigations into the money flows and exactly how the scheme at Tembisa was affected. And what Treasury found was that in most of the deals that Alu scored from Tembisa Hospital, the BBBEE certificates were fake. And I mean, they've got no reason to be fake. It's 100% black owned by a woman, even though she's a property. When the same BEE certificate was appended to the court papers, I thought these people have likely not changed their modus. Let me just phone and confirm that the certificate is legitimate. Lo and behold, it was a complete forgery.
That conversation next. Later in the show, EFF leader Julius Malema loses his firearm case in the courts. And finally, the French connection backs apartheid arms in our daily reflection with On This Day in South African History.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
My name's Graeme, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Moving to our top story today, Vusi Musi Cat Matlala may be high up in the news headlines these days for all the wrong reasons, sure. But the tender don keeps company with another figure who stands at the center of the Tembisa Hospital tender scam. That's one Hangwani Morgan Maumela, who managed to siphon more than 800 million rand from the hospital in the space of only 2 years. It's a fact now affirmed by the Special Investigating Unit, or SIU, this week. Now, it has since won an order to seize the tender boss's assets, including swanky mansions up and down Mzansi, including high-end vehicles like Lamborghinis. Despite the probe and our reporting, however, News 24's intrepid investigative journalist Jeff Wicks can today reveal that one of Maumela's companies has since been pursuing in the courts a bid to win yet another lucrative contract, this time to supply Northwest Province hospitals and clinics with catering services. While Wicks is live with us now from our Johannesburg studios based out in Randburg to tell us a whole lot more about this particular story. Jeff, so lekker to have you on again, bro.
And thank you for having me, G.
Okay. The aftermath from Babita Deokaran's murder and the revelations, it just doesn't seemingly stop. But before we get into Morgan's latest bid in another province, off the bat, and I spoke to News 24 Investigations editor Peter de Toy just yesterday about this on our webinar. But Jeff, you must be chuffed that the SIU's now come out and essentially affirmed the investigations that you had pursued with the News 24 team in the wake of Deokaran's murder. Well done, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And yes, it's heartening. I mean, I think as an investigative journalist, particularly, you work towards set outcomes, and I don't think any journalist worth their salt wants to get into this industry to not affect change. That's what we tried to do with telling Babita's story. And certainly, yes, it really does confirm our reportage to a large degree. And bearing in mind, this has been 3 years of work before this has now been critically affirmed by the SIU.
The mainstream news followers are now sort of cottoning on to a little bit more about who Morgan Maumela is. And of course, our News 24 subscribers know an awful lot about him because of our investigations, but now in the mainstream, people are starting to realize a little bit more about this more central figure throughout. He's quite a tenderpreneur. He's the nephew of our president, but I think you've told me this in the past on one of our lead editions, is that the president had claimed that he didn't know who Morgan is. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the president has definitely disavowed any sort of relationship with Morgan. I mean, we've been writing stories about Morgan and his presidential links for 2 years. And the narrative has always been that they have no relationship. It's an extended family and it's from a previous marriage. I certainly don't have any evidence to the contrary of that. But what remains is that Mr. Maumela does have a familial link, albeit tangential, to the union buildings. And in the same breath, is a very prolific businessman, who has become immensely wealthy from the public purse.
Right. And before we go on a little bit further, I mean, Morgan's known to be in control of numerous companies, or at least he's got directors as fronts within these companies that he's linked to, right? And they've won many, many different tenders over the years, right?
Absolutely. I think the lion's share of their income came from Tembisa Hospital. And, he's got his own little fleet of companies which are directly linked to his name. And not only that, his late cousin who died in a car accident. During our investigation, we managed to link in total 21 firms to him, either controlled directly by him or through proxy directors. What the SIU did, which is incredibly valuable, is they went further with their powers of intrusion, looking at money flows and the like. And they've sort of sketched the size of Morgan Maumela's syndicate as significant, 41 companies. And it's through those 41 entities that just over 820 million rand was pulled out of that facility in less than 2 years.
Sure. Okay, let's move now into this Northwest contract, right? And the Northwest, if you haven't been seeing the headlines, feels like very much the Wild West these days with, the political landscape is really fraught and councils are up for grabs. One's allegedly been hijacked by gunmen. There's two different factions in for another council that are trying to get control. They compete against each other. So it's quite a mess. And parliamentarians went there recently and was like, cheapers. They've never seen it this bad. Shocked, I think, was the Ramaphosa administration term that got touted. What is this Northwest catering contract that Maumela's company Alu was bidding for? It's essentially what to feed those patients at several Northwest hospitals and clinics, right?
Yes. So in essence, it's a 4-year deal, and what that bid or tender entailed was the provision of food services for every single patient that steps through the doors of 17 hospitals and clinics in that province. And, as soon as a patient crosses the threshold, the hospital becomes responsible for feeding them. In certain instances, different types of medical cases require specific diet, so it would fall within that realm. But essentially, it's providing food and food services for the patient. So not only the meals themselves, but also the staff to facilitate this across 17 distinct hospitals and clinics.
Right. So now Maumela's company is Alu. It's trying to get this bid, but his name, as we've previously alluded to, is not necessarily on the tin, is it? So how difficult was it to sort of link Maumela to this company that was bidding for this particular contract?
Well, actually, it was quite easy because Alu has become a name that really jumps out at me, just like all the other Tembisa Hospital companies. And what had happened was Alu at one point was directed by Hangwani Morgan Maumela's cousin, who, as I said, died in a car accident. And then what happened was very strange. He was then substituted with another director named Tebogo Segobodi. And she too was familiar with us because we'd placed her in Morgan's syndicate during our initial investigation. On the face of things, they appeared completely disparate, but they were lazy in a sense that the registered addresses were common. Her businesses and Morgan's businesses were all set out of the same flat in Fourways. And then now that she's the director of Alu, it sort of cements the link. But what takes it even further is that the email address that was being used to correspond with the Gauteng Department of Health, which we still found in Babita's Diocran's laptop database, was gallopinglimpopo3@yahoo.com. And that email address is linked to another company which Maumela owns called Galloping Limpopo 3 Supplier. So the links are pretty clear to see. But that's basically how we put them together.
Right. Okay. Take us through now Alu's bid to provide these catering services versus the winning bid from another company, right? And I thought this was very revealing out of your latest piece, which is still trending on News 24, Tembisa Hospital graft kingpin targets 1 billion rand Northwest Hospital tender. This was my favorite part of that piece because you basically look at the values of the overheads that both companies are bringing to the table and the actual per meal cost or per person costs, and you sort of show how it's somewhat of a facade. Why so, Jeff?
So basically how this deal was structured was that essentially these bidders would have to work in a cost per daily meal allowance. So that's 3 meals a day, and there's a whole bunch of different criteria. So it'll be meals for pediatric patients between newborn to 6 months, and then the age bracket is broken up, and there's a sort of a sliding scale for these meals along that vein. Combined with that, you've got your fixed overhead costs, which is the cost of employing staff, and they need to have certain qualifications like hotel service degrees and things like that. And you basically need to staff 17 facilities alongside this. And what Allu did, which was quite ingenious, was that the way they structured their bid was that these fixed costs, which in the grander scheme are completely negligible, they came in really low, and to the point where it was like impossibly low to be able to hire 4 people for 23,000 Rand. That doesn't make sense. And then what they did was they really hiked the prices of the individual means, and that's the variable cost, and that's where the money is made, because essentially that is determined by how many patients visit a hospital every month, and you will invoice for that. And I think the discrepancy was glaring enough that the total meal cost for the winning bidder was just over 700 Rand, and the total meal cost for Allu was 3,700 Rand. But because they structured their fixed costs so low, it looks better than it actually is. But what this would have effectively done was this would have pushed this tender into the point of unaffordability, well beyond a value of R1 billion. And that, in essence, was the wonder scheme that was affected with this bid.
To potentially fund some more Lamborghinis for Mr. Maumela. Okay, he doesn't get the contract. This other company by the name, I think it's Stan's Foods JV, they get the tender bid. But then Morgan Maumela seemingly he throws his toys out the cot and now goes to court. Why? Do we know?
Well, yes. Well, he launched this court application a week after the tender was awarded, and the new JV was obviously finding their feet and beginning to implement this tender. And what this interdictive actually did was put the brakes on that and really imperil the patients of 17 hospitals in the Northwest, because then there was doubt about how they would be provided with food. And it's a particularly brazen approach to go to court when you go to court under the name of a shell company, which has already long been exposed as being linked to Tembisa Hospital scandal, is under investigation by the SIU, the AFU, the Hawks, and a whole bunch of other acronyms. And you then take this into the public domain. And I thought that was particularly brazen, because they went about trying to say that, no, there was unfairness in the process, and they were obviously the deserving winners. And, it was a 2-part application wherein the interdict was initially delivered for them, and Part B is yet to be heard. So, it really threw a spanner in the works at the Northwest Health Department. And, it was done in a way that was so open, it's almost unbelievable, because when I saw the court papers and it said Allu, I was like, I can't believe these people have done this. Obviously, the proxy director was the one who deposed to the affidavit, but as we hold, and I firmly believe, is that Morgan Maumela is the hidden hand behind that company all along.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graeme Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072-562-3179.
This is The Lead. This is the South African story. My name's Graeme Rowenheimer, in conversation with our investigative journalist Jeff Wicks about the latest revelations regarding Maumela's bid for a lucrative catering contract over in the Northwest Province. Let's return to the conversation now. But here's the kicker. Throughout the investigation process that you led, Jeff, you found one critical revealing item about the Allu bid as led as a proxy for Mr. Maumela. What did you find?
So I've obviously been researching this company for a long time, and we've got our hands on some treasury investigations into the money flows and exactly how the scheme at Tembisa was affected. And what Treasury found was that in most of the deals that Allu scored from Tembisa Hospital, the BBBEE certificates were fake. And I mean, they've got no reason to be fake. It's 100% black owned by a woman, even though she's a proxy. And so when the same BEE certificate was appended to the court papers, I thought, these people have likely not changed their modus. Let me just phone and confirm that the certificate is legitimate. Lo and behold, it was a complete forgery. So I mean, that's where fraud comes in, when you're using that fraudulent BEE certificate to, number one, bid for the tender, and then launch a court challenge when you don't win. So I mean, that's really picking the stick for your own backside, if you ask me.
Yeah, because it's 350 Rand, I think, if you do it through a third-party company to get a new triple BEE certificate each year. So it's not really that expensive. And as you say, it's a majority-owned black company anyway. Why didn't they just
but
do
it? Was lazy. I would say it's like this weird cocktail somewhere between laziness and impunity. And you think you're not going to get caught. All it took was a single email. And I mean, that's investigative journalism for you.
Yeah, 100%. This was also revealing Alu's cash flow payments. In other words, what it spends its money on after it accumulates, contracts through tenders or whatever the case may be. What does that reveal to you over the span of your investigations? I thought that was also quite illuminating.
Well, again, this was drawn from a National Treasury investigation in aid of the SIU and the Hawks' probe into Tembisa Hospital.
Thanks.
And it's super interesting in that, I think Alu saw approximately 60 odd million pass through their account. And that money was just quickly moved to other entities in the Maumela syndicate. Conspicuously absent, however, and this is really damning, zero costs on rent and overhead for facilities, zero cost on salaries for the staff that you supposedly employ, and critically, and this is as relates to Tembisa Hospital, nothing spent on medical equipment and stock, which what they were supplying to the hospital, and being paid handsomely for it.
Sure, and the rest was like what? Like airtime, frivolous day-to-day things, right?
It was basically anything other than the cost of doing business. There was some cash withdrawal, some airtime. I think there was a couple of payments to the members of the Maumela family, but essentially that cash was just shifted straight out. And that is what now the state will allege is part of the money laundering machinery that Maumela steered.
Yeah, if you're listening right now, that's where our tax money is going to, money that could be benefiting so many different projects, initiatives in this country for the betterment of everybody living here. Where do we stand now with Alu's court bid? You said Part B of the application still needs to be heard. I've still got a question around Part A. It doesn't look like that was ventilated an awful lot because... yeah, surely the name of the company should have come up. Surely the Northwest Health Ministry should have known about this. What does it also say about the lack of internal red flag control mechanisms that government should be having and speaking to different departments saying, this particular company has been flagged by a separate SIU investigation. Come on.
Well, I think the root issue here, Graeme, is that, all of the companies which were looting Tembisa, they remain without an impediment in terms of doing business with the state. They've not been blacklisted. Any sort of blacklisting happens at the end of an investigation. We now know the SIU's probe is likely only going to be concluded in 2027. So there's nothing that stops them essentially from doing business with the state. And I understand why they've somehow been displaced from Gauteng. Perhaps the heat is lower in the Northwest. And to the credit of to the Northwest Health Department officials, the tender was not awarded to them. Their prices were rampantly high. So they had to go a different direction. And but it does expose a frailty in the system that they were not able to pick up and disqualify Alu earlier on because of what they were doing at Tembisa Hospital. But that's a greater and also a perennial issue that we've been dealing with. So part A of the application was obviously just to slam the brakes on the tender. It appears that the judge never really gave reasons in respect of that. Sure. And part B is yet to be set down. But now that we've sort of revealed that Alu's house is built on foundations of sand, and that sand being fraudulent documents, I imagine that this court action will dissipate quite quickly.
And I mean, for somebody listening, let's just quickly remind them the assets that the SIU's now got an order to freeze of the Maumela family. I mean, we're talking about high-end Lamborghinis. It's really the cliched luxury vehicle, and beautiful properties from Hartbeespoort all the way down to Cape Town, right?
The Maumela syndicate and Hangwani Morgan Maumela himself has a property portfolio that would make most billionaires blush. And, we found it in our investigation, and it was accumulated in the space of 5 years, coincidentally the same 5 years which he saw, a raft of trade from Tembisa Hospital. But these houses are insane. Like in one instance in Sandton, he bought adjacent properties, both valued at 75 million rand, and then raised the homes on those properties and started started building again. And it's a level of opulence that actually makes me, borderline physically ill, because who needs so many supercars? I ask you with tears in my eyes. And what makes it worse, Graeme, is when you contrast that lifestyle with the situation on the ground at Tembisa Hospital. Imagine, dear listener, what that facility would look like if 2 billion rand had not been pulled out of there. We understand that the public healthcare system, it flails often, especially in the Gauteng province, with, a lack of investment in infrastructure and understaffing and poor resourcing. Imagine the benefit that 2 billion rand would bring to that table, considering that money was paid out for goods and services, the lion's share of which were never actually delivered.
Just sort of to end off, Jeff, where do we stand now at the moment? Do we call Mr. Maumela a suspect? Is he accused? You say the SIU investigation will still be, only be looking for its finalization in the next more than a year or so. Yeah, where do we stand? Is the jig up for him, or is just this the beginning of the end?
Well, I think the asset seizure sort of gives us an indication that that's a precursor to criminal charges. Now, reading those court papers to secure the order to freeze his assets, the NPA sets out that he is at the head of a industrial scale looting and corrupt money laundering enterprise. So, this is massive. I think at some point we might shift from calling him a businessman or tenderpreneur to a fraud accused. But again, that remains to be seen. What is plain to me is that he obviously had the most to lose out of Tembisa Hospital. And, when several years ago, when our sources told us that he's the Don of Tembisa, we believed him, but now I understand why.
Right, and I can't wait to see what you come up with next in your investigations. Jeff, how's the book going?
The book's going well, and all of this is, I can never move away from it, and it's important that I mention it. All of this was set in motion by Babita Deokaran. It was her death and her sacrifice and her unwillingness to look the other way when she saw wrongdoing that got her killed. And, I'm privileged to be the one to continue her work, and I'm lucky to work for a place that supports and invests in investigative journalism that's allowed me to do that. And I must just also thank our subscribers. I know, paywall news sites have been getting a bit of a shellacking at the commission lately. But the cold, hard truth and reality is that the investigation into Babita Deokaran's murder, and by that virtue the book, would not have been possible if we'd not had the support of our subscribers, because this is long, hard and expensive work, and people need to understand why they have to pay for our news.
Yeah, Jeff's book, Shadow State, of course, is, and I saw this at OR Tambo International Airport when I was coming back from Joburg to Cape Town. It was number one, Brew, top seller. So congrats. It's a very difficult book market in this country. Thanks, Brew. I really appreciate you coming on the lead today.
Godspeed to you.
Trending topic.
To our trending topic now, and EFF leader Julius Malema is facing a potential stint in prison. That's after being found guilty of contravening the Firearms Control Act. This case, brought by AfriForum, was in response to Malema and his bodyguard Adrian Snyman's handling and firing of a rifle at a 2018 EFF rally. Malema has since been found guilty by an East London court of discharging this firearm in a public space, among other charges, while Snyman's been completely acquitted. Outside court, Malema's called the case racially and politically motivated, adding that he's not afraid of prison.
We are going to the appeal and we will go to the Supreme Court. We'll end up at the Constitutional Court. We are not fighting the case. We are fighting racism. Pure racism that we have been subjected to for 7 years. Mediocrity of the highest order.
Sentencing set down for January, after which Malema insists that he'll appeal with the planned help of advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi. What do you think? Drop us a voice note, 072 562 3179.
And finally,
Ending off now with On This Day in South African History. On this day, the 1st of October 1976, France had confirmed that it would sell 2 new combat submarines to South Africa. The move was meant to protect the vital oil route around the Cape, as Soviet naval activity in the Indian Ocean was said to be on the rise. At the time, the Soviet Union was backing liberation movements, including the African National Congress, intensifying the Cold War tensions of this period. Just days later, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev reaffirmed Moscow's commitment to supporting the overthrow of apartheid. He pledged continued backing for countries including Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia, all allies in the struggle against apartheid Pretoria. Well, that's courtesy of South African History Online on this day in history, the 1st of October, 1976. Drop us a mail, thelead@24.com. Send us a WhatsApp, 072-562-3179, and hit like, follow, and subscribe to be notified of our next editions. My name's Graeme, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have the lead.